Nearly 3 decades have passed since the death of JonBenét Ramsey, a 6-year-old child whose life ended inside her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. In the years since, her name has never left the public consciousness. It has appeared in headlines, documentaries, court filings, talk shows, and online debates, resurfacing again and again as new generations encounter the case for the first time. And yet, despite the passage of time, despite extensive investigation, and despite advancements in forensic science, one fact has never changed. JonBenét Ramsey's murder remains officially unsolved. That reality demands care. When a case persists this long without resolution, it becomes vulnerable to distortion. Familiar theories harden into assumptions. Repetition begins to sound like proof. Over time, speculation can quietly replace evidence. This documentary takes a different approach. It does not seek to relive shock or assign blame. Instead, it returns to the case with restraint, focusing on what can be verified, what remains uncertain, and why clarity has proven so difficult to achieve. Before continuing, if you value long-form, responsible, true crime storytelling that prioritizes evidence over accusation, consider supporting this work by liking the video, sharing it, and subscribing to the channel. Thoughtful engagement helps careful reporting reach an audience that values accuracy over speculation. JonBenét Ramsey's death did not fade quietly into history. It became one of the most intensely examined crimes in modern American memory. Every detail of the case, photographs, interviews, forensic findings, and public statements, has been scrutinized repeatedly. But what stands out today is not how much is known, but how much remains unresolved. Investigators, journalists, and independent analysts have revisited the same core materials for decades. Police reports, forensic records, witness interviews, and court documents have all been reviewed under shifting perspectives. Yet no single explanation has ever emerged that can account for all the evidence without contradiction. This documentary is built on that reality. It is guided by method rather than momentum, by documentation rather than rumor, and by the recognition that unresolved cases often reveal more about uncertainty than hidden truths. To understand why this case has never reached a conclusion, it is necessary to begin with the limits of what can be known and the discipline required to acknowledge those limits. One foundational fact has remained unchanged since December 1996. JonBenét Ramsey's death has never resulted in a criminal charge. No arrest has been made, no suspect has stood trial, no confession has been legally established. Despite years of investigation and repeated review, no court in the United States has ever identified her killer. That legal reality matters. True crime narratives often blur the boundary between suspicion and certainty. Over time, theories can be repeated until they resemble facts. But in this case, the justice system has reached no conclusion, not because it failed to investigate, but because the available evidence has never met the burden required by law. The Boulder Police Department conducted the initial investigation. The Boulder District Attorney's Office reviewed the evidence. Years later, a grand jury was convened, an unusual step that intensified public interest and speculation. Yet even then, no charges were pursued that formally named an individual responsible for JonBenét's death. This is not a procedural footnote. It is the framework within which the entire case exists. Whatever conclusions have circulated in media or popular culture exist outside the courtroom, and the gap between those two spaces, public opinion and legal proof, is where this case has fractured repeatedly. The law does not operate on intuition or implication. It requires evidence that can withstand scrutiny, challenge, and doubt. In this case, that threshold has never been crossed. That reality has frustrated investigators, divided public opinion, and sustained interest for nearly 30 years. It also defines the boundary for this examination. Every detail must be measured not by what feels convincing, but by what can actually be established. If no one has been charged, no confession confirmed, and no definitive forensic link proven, a question naturally arises. Why? The persistence of that question is not driven by evidence pointing clearly in one direction, but by the opposite. The evidence does not point clearly anywhere at all. What is often overlooked is not what investigators discovered, but what they could not establish. There is no fully uncontested timeline accounting for every moment of the night. There is no single piece of physical evidence that identifies a specific individual as the perpetrator. There is no eyewitness who can place a confirmed suspect in the home at the time of the crime. These absences are not minor. They are structural. In most homicide investigations, uncertainty narrows over time. Leads are eliminated. Possibilities contract. In the Ramsey case, uncertainty expanded. Interpretations multiplied, and the lack of definitive answers became the defining feature of the investigation. That vacuum invited speculation. Competing narratives grew alongside one another, each claiming to explain what the evidence could not conclusively show. As those narratives spread, they often did so without acknowledging their unproven foundations. This documentary begins not with an answer, but with recognition. The central mystery is not only who committed the crime, but why the evidence has never been able to say so with certainty. Understanding that requires stepping away from conclusions and returning to the foundations of the case. At the center of the investigation was a child. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old when she was found dead inside the home she shared with her family. That fact shaped the direction of the investigation from the very beginning. When a crime occurs within a private residence, investigators are obligated to begin with those who were present. This is standard procedure, not an accusation. JonBenét lived with her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, and her older brother Burke, who was 9 years old at the time and legally protected as a minor. From the outset, investigators focused on the household because they were the only confirmed occupants of the home that night. This focus was procedural, not presumptive. It is important to be precise. No member of the Ramsey family was ever charged with JonBenét's murder. No family member was ever convicted. No court has ever identified any of them as responsible for her death. At the same time, investigators did not limit their inquiry to the family alone. The possibility of an intruder was explored. Doors, windows, and potential points of entry were examined. Friends, acquaintances, and individuals with peripheral connections were interviewed. Over time, multiple investigative paths were pursued, sometimes simultaneously. Public attention, however, followed a different trajectory. Media coverage increasingly narrowed its focus onto individuals rather than evidence. Interviews were replayed and analyzed. Body language was scrutinized. Silence and emotion were interpreted. Over time, speculation about people began to eclipse documented facts about the crime itself. This distinction matters. Investigators are tasked with determining what happened. The public often seeks someone to blame. In a case as emotionally charged as this one, that impulse became a powerful force. From the very beginning, the investigation unfolded under conditions that limited how much certainty could ever be achieved. Some of those limits were legal, others were procedural, and some resulted from decisions made in the earliest hours of the case, decisions that could not later be undone. The crime scene was not preserved in the manner investigators would have preferred. After the initial emergency call, friends and acquaintances were present in the home. People moved through rooms. Objects were handled. In a case that would hinge on fine detail, contamination became unavoidable. This does not imply misconduct. It reflects the reality of complex investigations conducted in real time under extraordinary pressure. That pressure was immediate. Within days, the case became national news. Media scrutiny was constant. Investigators were examined as closely as the evidence itself. These constraints did not lead the investigation toward clarity. They created space where questions lingered longer than answers, and where uncertainty became permanent. The timeline of December 25th and the early hours of December 26th, 1996 forms the backbone of the case and one of its greatest points of contention. What follows is not speculation, but a summary of what is documented in official records. On Christmas Day, the Ramsey family attended a gathering. Later that night, they returned home. According to statements given to investigators, JonBenét was asleep when they arrived and was carried inside. She was later put to bed. In the early morning hours of December 26th, Patsy Ramsey contacted emergency services, reporting that her daughter was missing and that a ransom note had been found in the home. Law enforcement arrived shortly thereafter. At that time, the situation was treated as a potential kidnapping. Officers conducted an initial search of the residence. Friends and acquaintances were contacted and arrived at the house. The home was not secured as a closed crime scene. Later that morning, during a subsequent search, John Ramsey discovered JonBenét's body in a basement room. At that moment, the investigation shifted from a missing child to a homicide. From there, certainty diminished. The precise sequence of events leading to JonBenét's death could not be conclusively reconstructed. The timing, order of actions, and duration between them remain subjects of debate because the evidence does not provide definitive answers. As the investigation progressed, certain details resisted explanation. One of the most discussed was the ransom note itself. Its length, language, and placement raised questions, yet no definitive evidence ever established who wrote it or when. Handwriting analysis produced differing opinions, not proof. Statements given over time contained variations, an expected feature of traumatic memory, but problematic in a case requiring precision. Physical evidence presented similar challenges. Objects and materials raised questions, but could not be conclusively tied to a specific individual or moment. These inconsistencies matter not because they accuse, but because they prevent resolution. They explain why certainty never formed. As years passed, the case increasingly unfolded in two parallel spaces, one governed by evidence and law, the other shaped by media and interpretation. These spaces operated by different rules. Repetition lent familiarity to theories. Familiarity was mistaken for credibility. Theories emerged in an attempt to impose order on uncertainty. An intruder theory, a family involvement theory, and accident-based interpretations each sought to explain the same incomplete record. Each contained elements of possibility and significant limitations. None met the standard required to become fact. Forensic science confirmed that JonBenét was killed inside the home. Beyond that, certainty narrows. DNA evidence did not match family members, but did not conclusively identify a perpetrator. Other physical findings raised questions without providing answers. This is not a failure of science, it reflects its limits. Forensic evidence cannot restore what was never preserved. After decades of review, the legal status of the case remains unchanged. No one has been named as JonBenét Ramsey's killer by a court of law. That outcome reflects restraint, not neglect. The truth of this case exists not as a conclusion, but as a boundary. A child was killed. The circumstances of her death were never reconstructed with enough certainty to satisfy the law. Every theory emerged to fill gaps left by missing or compromised evidence, and every theory ultimately fell short. This case endures because it challenges our need for resolution. It reminds us that uncertainty can harden into belief, and that restraint is not avoidance. It is responsibility. That may not be the ending many want, but it is the most honest one the record allows. Until evidence emerges that can withstand scrutiny, uncertainty remains not the weakness of this case, but its defining truth.